Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, you will see a thriller and action film from 2011 titled Limitless. So let's start the recap. Eddie Mora is a sloppy, unemployed writer. Eddie has a contract to write a book, but he has writer's block because he is more talk than action. As the movie begins, we hear a loud banging on a metal door that leads to a fancy apartment with boxed up belongings. A tiny tour of the luxury apartment reveals two dead bodies lying on the floor. On top of the building, standing right on the edge of the balcony, we see Eddie. As he takes 1 foot off the ledge, he hears 2 gunshots in the next apartment. He then hears someone screaming and knocking at his door to be let in. Eddie is very disappointed in himself as he thinks of jumping off the roof. So does he jump? We don't know that yet. The next scene is a flashback of over a year earlier. Eddie is walking down the street wearing a weird outfit with messy hair. He is then seen drinking midday in a bar while he's telling 2 guys about his novel, but it seems like the guys aren't convinced that Eddie is really a writer. Later, he is seen trying to write, but since he's on his writer's block, he's mostly just procrastinating until he finally leaves his apartment and goes out to drink again. Weeks and months pass with him not writing a single word. That's when he meets with his girl Lindy at lunch, where she gives him his keys back and breaks up. Eddie was going to propose to her, but she reminded him of his last marriage with Melissa that didn't work out too well. She is frustrated with his lack of career progress while she has recently been promoted to the editor's post. While he's walking back home feeling bad about all that's been happening to him, he sees his ex-brother-in-law Vernon. Eddie is not excited to see him, but Vernon somehow convinces Eddie to have a drink with him. After a drink, they talk about Eddie's creative problems, and that's when Vernon suggests he can help him. Vernon shows Eddie a pill, which is some sort of magic designer drug that apparently can help you access your whole brain. Eddie doesn't buy it. That's when Vernon hands him a sample pill. While walking back home, Eddie is still wallowing in self-loathing when he decides to take the pill. As he enters the building, he runs into his landlord who's screaming at him. Ignoring all that she's saying, Eddie's mind is racing, wondering about the effects of the drug when it finally hits. All of a sudden, he starts noticing everything that he was previously unaware of. All the small details around him were now visible to him. They then talk about her studies as he accesses different memories in his head. He then walks into his apartment and realizes how filthy it is and begins cleaning it. The drug has made his mind perfectly clear. He then begins writing with a clear mind, and this time, under the influence of the drug, he's actually doing it. The next day, Eddie wakes up and feels that the effect of the drug has completely worn off, but the good news is that he still has the pages he has written for his novel, so he goes to see his publisher. Eddie urges her to read the unfinished manuscript and promises to return the advance if she doesn't like it. As he comes back home, he sees 3 messages from her saying that the manuscript was brilliant. Instead of calling her back, he goes to see Vernon. Vernon already knows the reason for Eddie's visit and tells him that he will give him more of the drug, but for that he has to run some errands for him. Eddie goes to get his dry cleaning and picks up breakfast for him. When he comes back to Vernon's house, he sees that the door is open. The place was completely ransacked and Vernon was lying on his couch. Eddie walks over to him and sees that he's dead. Eddie immediately calls for the police, and waiting for them to arrive, he realizes that the people who came looking for the drug never found them, so he begins looking. Eddie ultimately finds the drug along with Vernon's black book and some cash. That's when the police arrived. Later, he's being questioned in a police station when the detective becomes suspicious of Eddie's story. Melissa calls the detective and asks to speak to Eddie. She tells him that she doesn't want him at Vernon's funeral and that she'll call him later. Eddie leaves the police station, paranoid that someone is following him. As he gets home, he counts the money and takes a pill, which knocks him into a montage of him completely rediscovering himself and the power of the drug. He first gets a haircut and buys new clothes, finishes his novel and delivers it to his publisher. He then learns how to play the piano and speak different languages in a short span of time. Suddenly, he can use math to win at poker and figures out the combination of drugs his aunt needs to deal with cancer. He can talk business and impress people with his wit. He even gets an offer to work with one of them. Eddie makes new rich friends with private jets and poolside manors that he vacations with. However, he starts getting reckless and needs more and more of the adrenaline rushes. He then has an enlightenment about what to do for the rest of his life, but realizes he needs a lot of money to do it. We then see him back at his apartment looking at the trade numbers and taking the pill again. Investing in trade isn't enough for him to get all the money he wants, so he looks for a loan shark at a diner. He somehow convinces him to give him $100,000. For the drop, they meet at a park when the loan shark tells him about the consequences he would have to face if he is unable to return the loan. Later, he takes up the job he was offered and quickly figures out a way to double his money investing. Other big players begin noticing Eddie, and he gets a meeting with one of them. He then meets Lindy over dinner and impresses her by ordering an Italian. He apologizes to her and charms her to win her back. They start seeing each other again. Time goes by and he becomes more and more successful. That's when he gets the feeling that he's being followed. The next day, Eddie and his boss have a meeting with Carl Van Loon. Eddie manages to impress the man by showing off his abilities. Van Loon gives Eddie a ride home, and in the car, he hands Eddie some documents telling him to look them over. As they reach Eddie's place, he gives him an evaluation of what he's read. Being impressed, the man sets up another meeting. Instead of going home, Eddie prefers taking a walk thinking about the future. Suddenly, he begins feeling strange again. It seems as if time started to move differently. He then reaches a bar, unaware of how he got there. He then begins partying and sleeping around, but he still has a feeling that he's being followed. He gets into a fight on the subway and realizes he's learned to fight just by watching kung fu movies and boxing on TV. All of a sudden, he finds himself on the top of a bridge where he stops, being unable to recall the last 18 hours of his life. The next day, he wakes up feeling horrible and decides not to take another pill. Going through the documents given to him by Van Loon, he finds out that they seem illegible. He goes to the meeting without being under the influence of the pill, where Van Loon is expecting high-level answers, but all Eddie can focus on is the TV where he heard the news that the woman he was with at the hotel is now dead. He leaves the meeting abruptly. After getting home, he receives a call from Melissa. He asks her to meet him. He then remembers Vernon's black book and starts calling people from the list. All the people on the list are either sick or dead. The last number belongs to the man who followed him and is sitting on the same bench with him. Eddie sees him and runs, but the man starts chasing him. He manages to lose him and meets Melissa, who tells him that she has also been on the drug and barely made it out alive. She then notices that Eddie has also been taking the pill and tells him to go off slowly, otherwise it could be lethal. Eddie keeps getting worse, and when he comes back home, he sees the loan shark waiting for him. As Eddie is grabbing the money he owes him from the bank, the man seems unaffected by the drug. Eddie gives him his money, but there are no noticeable changes to his intelligence yet. Later, Eddie stumbles into Lindy's office. He is forced to tell her everything and asks her to get the drugs he's hidden in her apartment. After getting the drugs from her home, she calls Eddie and tells him that a man is following her. The man tries to approach her as her cab gets stuck in traffic. Eddie tells her to run, but the man chases her. Lindy runs into a park and asks two men standing there to help her. The stalker stabs both of them as she runs away again. Lindy calls Eddie and tells him that she's stuck and afraid. Eddie then tells her to take one tablet, and she does it. Lindy is now under the influence of the drug, and she experiences the exact same thing that Eddie did. She then starts running away, knowing exactly what to do. The man follows her until she eventually loses him. Lindy then gives a tablet to Eddie, and they check into a hotel. Lindy is leaving Eddie again, but he tries to convince her to stay by saying that he'll get back on track. She disagrees after taking the drug herself. She leaves regardless of what Eddie had to say. Later, he hires 2 bodyguards and goes to see Van Loon. Eddie apologizes about the meeting and Van Loon gives him the job. He then brokers the biggest merger in history for him and gets back on his feet. But eventually the drug stash runs out. He offered a chemist a lot of money if he could reformulate the drug for him. One day, a detective comes to see Eddie. He tells him that he's been identified as the man running out of the hotel room where the girl was killed. Eddie hires a top lawyer who bails him out. Later at a meeting, he notices that one of the men from the opposing side is sick, hence they will reconvene to sign the contract the next day. Eddie goes back to his room, finding his room was thrashed. He then buys the fancy apartment that we saw in the beginning of the movie. He then runs into the loan shark, who is completely transformed, and threatens Eddie to bring him more pills or else he will tell his boss about the trouble with the police. The next day, Atwood doesn't show up to sign the contract, and his wife tells him that he's sick. And as they are walking out, he sees the man who has been following him get into the car with her. As Eddie gets back to his office after somehow managing to get rid of the case, he sees his boss watching the news about the merger and tells him that Atwood is dying. Eddie then gets the urge to take a tablet but is unable to find his stash. Eddie then receives a package with his bodyguard's hand inside it. As he gets home, he watches Atwood's wife in the news lying about the merger. That's when he sees the loan shark outside his door. Next, Eddie is seen standing on the edge of his balcony. Fast forward to today. He doesn't jump, but rather tries to remember where he could have left one more tablet. He ends up dropping the tablet he found. At the same time, the loan shark walks into his apartment. They grab Eddie and tell his men to find the stash. Eddie stabs the loan shark as he leans over and drinks his blood to get a fix of the drug. It works. He then fights off the goons. Meanwhile, Atwood dies. Later, the stalker helps Eddie find more drugs at his apartment. 12 months later, Eddie is running for the Senate. Van Loon comes to see Eddie and tells them that he knows about the drug and that he can supply him with the drug if he agrees to work with them. Eddie refuses his offer and tells him that he learned to get off the pill while keeping the positive effects. In the end, he walks to a restaurant and meets Lindy there. This is it for today's video. Make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. See you next time.